Hello everyone, thanks for coming to my talk. Today I hope to share with you some ideas about some unconventional yet totally obvious ways to bolster student success in your introductory psych courses, as well as potentially increase retention and persistence to graduation. In a nutshell, the key insight is that high-risk students are high risk because they have not yet developed the skills needed for success in some courses. I want to show you a method for identifying the courses requiring those skills, even if you don't know what those skills are. Then the secret is to adjust advising of high-risk students to give them the best chances of success. If that sounds like something you're into, then you're in the right place. If something I said opened a can of worms or cans of worms, hopefully by the end I'll have put the worms back in the cans with the lid firmly attached. The story starts for me back in the fall of 2012, or as I call it, the Black Fall. I was a fairly new professor at a small, rural, public liberal arts college with lots of low-income first-generation students who had limited opportunities because of their economic backgrounds and location. With a few semesters of teaching under my belt, I was completely unfazed when one of my colleagues took a sabbatical and I was asked to cover his introductory psych courses for that semester. I'd never taught it before, but I was excited at the prospect of being the first person to expose students from all kinds of backgrounds to the wonderful science that is psychology. Of course, I didn't know what veteran instructors of intro psych know, which is that teaching the gen ed curriculum is tough. I can't even put into words all the nuanced ways that it is rough, but I can point to a metric that is enough to disconcert any blossoming professor: grade distributions. I was amazed that my rate of D's, F's, and W's withdrawals was 50%. My prior experience in upper-level courses where there were a few A's, more B's, and lots of C's, but almost no one got D's or F's. When my colleague returned, he was totally unsurprised. Apparently, my distribution was basically the same as his. In future semesters, I tinkered, trying to meet the students where they are, supporting as much as possible. And my grade distribution shifted. Well, half of it did. The C's trickled up to B's, and some of the B's became A's, but overall, the DFW rate didn't change, and I wound up with a bimodal distribution. I'd failed to reach the students that I most needed to reach. By the way, if you search the literature on DFW rates in introductory psych courses, they range from 20 to 50% pretty much everywhere, and it hasn't changed much over the past half century. And that's about what's expected for gen ed courses in general. Of course, what's a professor to do besides moaning to other professors? In a conversation I had with another colleague who teaches earth science, he had noticed a trend. At our institution, about 75% of incoming students required developmental math. Those who had not yet passed that course were failing, and those who had passed it were not. I wondered if the explanation were really that simple, so I checked my own courses. In my classes, a student who didn't need a developmental math course or had already passed it had a 90% chance of passing, whereas those who required remediation only had about a 10% chance of passing. Now, I don't ask them a single math problem in intro psych, but something about those students was clearly different. Immediately I thought, why are we putting students in my class if I know they're only going to have a 10% chance of success? Why not wait a semester or two until after they've passed that developmental math, then have them enroll? So with this preliminary evidence, I convinced the administration to let me filter through an anonymized data set of the past 9 years for every incoming freshman student. I had their incoming test scores, age, athletic status, and a number of other variables, along with every course they enrolled in during their first and second semester. I also had their persistence to the second year, and ultimately their graduation date if there was one. So I set about answering the following two questions. First, what variables predict high risk of low GPAs and attrition? The second question was, what are the success rates of high and low risk students in each course that we offered on campus that might be taken by a first-year freshman? Now, the first question was easy enough to answer because we'd already stumbled upon it, math readiness. But this was confirmed using some regressions. And interestingly, though many of our students required developmental English as well, developmental math seemed to be the key predictor. Students who required remediation in both actually had the highest risk of all. The simplest way to determine whether an incoming freshman was high risk was to look at their math ACT score. For us, anything under 19 was considered high risk. For the question of success rates of high and low risk students, I analyzed each of the 266 courses over the 9-year period that were taken by some first-time, full-time freshman student. Grades of A, B, and C were considered success, and D, F, and W were not. I then generated a chart with each course, the sample size, and the probability of success. Low-risk students, unsurprisingly, fare well across the board with a median success rate of 79%, so they're pretty much safe to enroll in anything the average student will pass it. On the contrary, students requiring developmental math only had a 57% median chance of success, with some courses as low as 19%. The crazy thing is that some of the courses we were most likely to advise students to take were the ones they had the worst chances of success in. The most popular course outside of the required freshman seminar to place students in was the Introduction to Computer Science, which only had a 55% success rate. Gen Psych, which was another popular option, only had a success rate of 52%, just like I had experienced. But keep in mind, this isn't just me. This is any professor who taught Gen Psych over the past 9 years in aggregate together. So to whatever extent that there are differences between faculty, this encompasses both the easy ones and the hard ones. It's really about the subject, not the individual faculty. Gen Ed sociology and history courses all had rates under 60%. We don't know why math preparedness has anything to do with the content of these courses, but the data are clear. We should not be placing high-risk students in these courses. Now, this is why it's important to determine the risk levels empirically. If you'd asked me, do they need pre-algebra or to be math ready as a prerequisite skill for intro psych, I would say no. Sometimes our faculty intuitions and the actual data tell different stories, but getting it wrong matters. How many high-risk students enter college, register for their developmental math, and they also pick up Gen Psych, a couple of history courses, all of which they're likely to fail, then go on to fail them, and then blame themselves, wind up in a state of learned helplessness, give up on college entirely? What does that do to their self-esteem, to their future earning prospects, to drop out with nothing but a few semesters worth of student loans? What are they going to think of psychology after all of this? All when we could have predicted the outcome before they even got here. Okay, so you ask, what do we have them take instead? And I don't want to discourage people from taking intro psych. Well, I hear you. There are other courses that we found that high-risk students were fine to take. In our case, many physical education and health courses, introduction to the arts, public speaking, and their basic writing courses were much more appropriate for them to take. To be clear, this isn't because those courses are easier. Remember, if you look at low-risk students, all of the courses are passed by the average student. More importantly, if you looked at the success rates of students who took and passed developmental math in their first semester, once they passed that math course, they were indistinguishable from students who didn't require developmental math at all, which suggests that there really might be a skill deficit of some kind, although there is some nuance here about selective attrition that happens. This is important too because it suggests that you aren't discouraging people from taking these courses altogether. After all, they still need many of these classes for Gen Ed credits. Instead, you're simply taking the order of the courses and putting the ones in which they have a low chance of success, moving them a semester or two later when the success chances increase. Ultimately, the same number of people will take introductory psychology, but maybe take it in their third semester rather than their first. Shuffling the order of courses like this costs the institution nothing, no changes to the number of courses required. So why aren't we doing this? So what would happen, hypothetically, if we took this course list and registered high-risk students optimally with skill appropriateness in mind? In my sample, 20% of the 562 high-risk students graduated within a 6-year period. I calculated their average probability of success in each course from their first semester to create what I call a skill-appropriate course score, or SAC score. I used logistic regression to determine the relationship between SAC score and graduation probability. According to the model, if you could place a student in all SAC courses with 100% pass rates, the graduation rate would maximize at about 57%, nearly triple what it actually was. Of course, 100% pass rates are unattainable in practice, but this demonstrates the range of possible values. Likewise, the average SAC score in my sample was 67%. Not too bad. Just a small drop to 50%, though, would cut the graduation rate in half. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that we shouldn't put high-risk students in courses we know they're not going to pass, and that we can encourage them to still take those courses, but just later on when they're ready for them. I know that every institution is going to be different. We've got different student populations we serve, different degree requirements, and on and on. Maybe you don't even have students with math ACTs lower than 19, or maybe that group isn't at risk for your population. That's okay. I hope I've inspired you to think about how you can use empirical data to solve the problems you face as an instructor or as a program. You can look at what the risk factors are for your students using similar methods. Or maybe the issue is that you'll never get your administration on board to change advising or requirements for all students. Start with what you can do. What do you have control over? Advise your own students in your own classes. Talk to your program about adding appropriate prerequisites. I think we can do better for high-risk students with very little effort on our part. Better for the student, who has higher chance of graduation. Better for the administration, who has higher graduation rates and lower student loan defaults. And better for the faculty member teaching students who are ready for success in that course. It's a win-win-win. I'd like to hear your thoughts and ideas. If you'd like to check out the full published manuscript with more nuance and tips on implementation, I'll put a link in the description. Thanks again, and until next time, keep thinking.